Hey everybody, we have a big topic today. That is promises. Promises are an object that encapsulate the result of an asynchronous operation. A benefit is that they let asynchronous methods return values like they were synchronous. It's a promise to return something in the future. For this topic, let's pretend that we're fetching a file. I haven't talked about the fetch API yet, but we'll do so in the future. For the time being, we'll just pretend that we're loading a file. Let file loaded. This will be a Boolean value, true or false. I'll set this to true. Loading a file is an asynchronous process. We could encapsulate this asynchronous process with a promise. When this process is finished, the promise can return a value or catch any exceptions if there's any problems, like we can't find the file. So this is how to create a promise. Let's declare one. Const promise equals new promise. Within the promise, we can list a callback, a function expression, or an arrow function expression. I'll use an arrow function expression. There's two arguments, resolve and reject. If our asynchronous process is successful, we will invoke this resolve callback. If not, we'll invoke reject. So what would we like to do within this promise? We can place any asynchronous code within this promise. Then let's check to see if our file is loaded. If file loaded, we will invoke this callback of resolve. If you have any arguments for this callback, you can place those here. I'll add some text. File loaded. Else, we will invoke reject. Place any arguments within this callback. File not loaded. That's step one of our promise. Promises have a state. They're pending, then they're fulfilled or rejected. And the result is what can be returned. There's two parts to a promise: the producing code, which is this portion, and the consuming code. If this promise is resolved, what do we want to do? We'll handle that with the consuming code. We will take our promise, follow the promise with invoking the then method. If our promise is resolved, then we can perform some function. This can be a callback to a function expression, or an arrow function expression. I'll stick with an arrow function expression. If we have any arguments, we can list them here. We're returning one value, just some text. Value, arrow, then let's do something. Console.log, whatever my value is. Okay, let's try this. After creating this promise, my file loads. That's set to true. File loaded. What would happen if we couldn't locate a file? This value is false. Well, we have an uncaught exception because we invoked this reject callback. To catch any exceptions, we can follow then with catch. And I'll place this on a new line, just so it's easier to read. We have one argument, so let's set up one parameter. This is the argument. We will name this parameter error. Arrow, what would we like to do? Console.log, whatever my error is. When I run this again, we have caught this exception. File not loaded. So that's kind of the basics of a promise. It's a promise to return something in the future. The state is pending, then it's either fulfilled or rejected. Now, you don't necessarily need to reject a promise. This would still work too. But it doesn't do anything. Here's another example. Let's create a separate promise. We'll wait for 5 seconds, then display a message. Const promise equals new promise. I'll write an arrow function expression. This time we will only resolve. Arrow. And then maybe some curly braces. Okay, what are we going to do within this promise? Let's set timeout for 5 seconds. Set timeout. Resolve after 5 seconds. That's 5,000 milliseconds. Then I will take the name of my promise, follow it with then pass in a function. So you don't necessarily need to return a value when resolving. So this function will have no arguments. Arrow will display a message. Console.log. Thanks for waiting. After 5 seconds, this should display my message. Thanks for waiting. What if you would like to pass an argument to a promise? Let's rename this promise object as something else, something that's more descriptive, like wait. Wait is now a promise. When we create this promise, we can pass an argument. How about an amount of milliseconds? Let's wait for 3 seconds. That's 3,000 milliseconds. I'll precede this promise with an arrow function and list any arguments before the arrow. Maybe time. Time will be this value, whatever we're passing in. We'll wait for some amount of time, 3,000 milliseconds. Let's run this again. 1, 2, 3. Thanks for waiting. So yeah, those are promises. They're objects that encapsulate the result of an asynchronous operation. They let asynchronous methods return values as if they were synchronous. It's a promise to return something in the future. So those are promises. If you would like a copy of the code we worked on today, I'll post that in the comments section down below. And well, yeah, that's an introduction to promises in JavaScript.